This is Kevin Conroy, the voice of Batman. And you're listening to the DCAU Review, hosted by Cal and Liam, streaming at DCAUreview.com and on your favorite podcast app.
On the mean streets of Gotham City, a new breed of supervillains emerges. But deep in the shadows, old school justice awaits. And the Batman, the Caped Crusader, returns in an all-new animated series. The Batman. You won't even see it coming. This is it.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to episode 199 of the DCAU Review. I am one of your hosts, Cal, and with me, my good friend, good brother, the man that runs our Twitter account. That's right. He's been maximizing our presence on the internet using those hashtags this week. Not at all taking advantage of the fact that hashtag the Batman is one of the top trending hashtags every single week. That's right. It's Liam. Liam, welcome to episode 199 of the DCAU Review.
That is right, Cal. Yes, is it a coincidence that we are happy to be reviewing something called The Batman that features the Riddler? And the answer to that question is it's none of your business. And please be quiet and enjoy the content. No, we kid. Of course, yes, we thought it would be fun to do a little tie-in here and maybe get a look at a show that we've really only talked about a couple times over our now encroaching on 200 episodes of this podcast. And that is, of course, 2004's The Batman. Started in 2004 and ran for several seasons. But yes, this time we're looking at a season 2 episode entitled Riddled.
That's right, Liam. And that last time was actually 100 episodes ago, as he pointed out before we went on the air here, that back in episode 99 was the last time that we covered 2004's The Batman. But yeah, this week we're covering the episode Riddled, as you mentioned. This one does feature the debut or the series debut of Edward Nygma's Riddler, a unique, certainly different take than we're used to, especially when comparing it to the DCAU's version. We'll get into that as we discuss this episode. But before we do, we, of course, have the official Internet Movie Database official synopsis for this week's episode, brought to you by, that's right, the Pod Tower. Don't forget, you can follow us on the Pod Tower on YouTube, where you get all of your DCAU review content, including bonus episodes and our entire catalog, alongside our friends at the Watchtower Database and Tim Talk, who also have amazing content up there. Head over to youtube.com/thepodtower and subscribe. That way you can support us and our friends.
Absolutely. And this is the synopsis for Riddled, which was written by Christopher Yost and J.D. Murray, directed by Sam Liu, with music by Thomas Chase Jones. And I could not find an animation company listed, but we will press on with that synopsis. That reads as such. Fearing that the Riddler will make good on his threat to destroy the city, the Batman and Detective Yin's secret alliance is put at risk when they must work together to solve a string of riddles that have been scattered throughout Gotham.
That's a lot of words.
Yeah, you're telling me.
Just seem to go on and on and on and on.
Hard to keep that voice up for that many words.
Not bad, but could have used a full period stop at some point. Perhaps a comma or two, maybe an Oxford comma. I don't know. But yeah, I guess that will bring us to our discussion of the plot for this week, Liam, as we go through our own synopsis. And we start the episode off as Gotham PD is outside of a museum, it looks like, and there is the bomb squad heading in. We learn that there is a trap set about for the police with what appears to be a series of bombs. Not actually alien from something you might see later on in the Batman Arkham games, to be honest. We'll talk about that visuals, but these very bright green neon bombs, and it's actually linked to a computer screen. And on the computer screen, we can read that there is a riddle interestingly enough, or a series of questions here, designed, of course, where if they don't, the bomb squad expert determines that if they do not solve this riddle before the time ticks down, that they're likely to lose not only their own lives, but many of the lives in the surrounding block as well. And just as that bomb squad expert leaves Detective Yin, who of course we talked about in prior episodes, she is the de facto contact that Batman sort of works with for the alongside another character that isn't featured in this episode for other reasons, but she is the de facto character, Batman's contact, sort of the Jim Gordon stand-in, or perhaps a Renee Montoya type character that is Batman's liaison and somebody that is his ally within the GCPD, because Batman himself is very much still a vigilante and not welcome presence for the majority of the upper echelon of the leadership of Gotham City's police department and above. So it is at this point that Batman, of course, reveals himself to be right there with Detective Yin, and he does his best to solve this very riddle.
You know we can't let them see us together.
If they do, just tell them I'm your prisoner. When you do not know what I am, then I am something. But when you know what I am, then I am nothing. What am I?
We'll be nothing if we don't leave right now.
I am a riddle.
Okay. No one needs to see us run out of here together, and I get to keep my badge.
Bravo! Someone is very bright. Step into the light. So the Riddler can see you.
And wouldn't you know it, stops it just in time. But as we mentioned, Batman's not allowed to be associated with Detective Yin for fear of her repercussions and potentially losing her job. So he ducks back out of the way, just as we get a camera reveal and a hologram appearing of this very unique Riddler style for this The Batman series. And he begins to have a conversation with Detective Yin, very impressed with her ability, or he believes her ability, to solve this riddle, and decides that in fact it will be a sort of game, if you will, for the rest of the evening, that he will continue with his riddles until she is unable to solve one.
Yeah, and this is it's kind of the rest of the episodes we'll get to is kind of just a series of Yin and Batman sort of in the background trying to remain hidden while they solve these various riddles and various kind of unique set pieces. The next one coming up here is Yin heads to Gotham Bridge, where there's a sort of unmarked van with a special puzzle in the back of it that Batman has to help her out. And one thing I do like about this episode, narratively speaking, is they kind of took the concept of the old 1960s Riddler episodes of the Adam West Burt Ward show, where it's like the cops are, for the most part, useless in solving these crimes, but Batman figures them out in about 3 seconds most of the time.
Yep.
And that actually is probably the best source of comedy in the episode, which is playing kind of so they've sort of packed Commissioner Gordon and Chief O'Hara into one category here for the purposes of this story, that being the recurring Chief Rojas, who of course, as you mentioned, very anti-Batman, just this sort of blowhard, angry, pound in the desk cop who is just completely befuddled by every single riddle, no matter how simple it is. Even as Yin and Batman are discussing how some of these riddles, like the one for the bridge, could be solved by a small child, he's completely out of sorts by all of us. So I think they kind of had that vibe going on. But yes, as Yin arrives and Batman helps her start to solve this special sort of on a screen, there's some sort of puzzle. She has to press different squares in order to solve it. And in the,
it looks like
sort of the
Minesweeper, I feel like. Is that what
yes,
that was based off of?
Yeah, I think so. And while she continues to try to solve the puzzle, Chief Rojas and some of the other bumbling officers of the Gotham City Police Department show up, and unfortunately, they are caught on camera by the Riddler. And so all of a sudden, the doors slam shut, and Yin is sort of taken away, and this sort of becomes sort of an action sort of car chase while Yin continues to try to solve this puzzle with Batman following behind on his glider. Meanwhile, this sort of remote controlled van is sweeping through the streets of Gotham. Finally, they're able to disarm it, and the bombs that are all attached to the structure of the bridge are seemingly deactivated. And that takes us to our next set piece, which is in fact a museum, and another set piece here where Batman and Yin, they're still not quite figuring it all out yet, but Batman's beginning to suspect that they might be being sent on something of a wild goose chase.
A man builds a house with all four sides facing north. A bear walks past the house. What color is the bear?
Facing north.
What color is the bear? Knowledge is power. Pity about your hard drive over here. You're ice cold. You couldn't be further from the truth, Detective. Oh, now, you're boring me.
Boring. Like a drill. Riddler can't resist leaving riddles, even once he shouldn't be.
Four sides facing north. Ah, the house is at the South Pole, so it's a polar bear. The answer is white. Taking a risk, aren't you?
There are no bears at the South Pole. This riddle has no answer.
Riddler cheated?
Riddler quit. He's through playing.
Dessert gelatin?
Riddler's been leading us away from the main course, further from the truth, all night long.
Yes, especially when he starts putting some of the pieces together and remembering the various different clues that appear to be dropping. It's the Riddler. So, and again, this appears to be Batman's first interaction with this character. So he's sort of learning his patterns and realizes that he can't help himself but drop additional clues in some of the dialogue that he's having and the banter back and forth with Detective Yin. So as Batman sort of realizes that the final riddle that he's given to Detective Yin doesn't have an answer, he realizes that the Riddler is perhaps given up at this point and has led them far enough away for him to be able to complete his ultimate plot. And in this moment, Batman sort of pulls the plug on these pseudo bombs and realizes they're just green gelatin and that it's not real actual bombs in this case. So that leads him sort of back to where they originally started, which we learn is sort of the housing for the Gotham mainframe. And we get a sort of this expositional discussion between the Riddler and Batman and Detective Yin as they arrive back. And he gives them sort of his ultimate plan at this point, which has been to download the Gotham's mainframe into his brain, which I don't think he means his literal brain, but sort of a metaphorical brain when it comes to his own mainframe at that point, so that he has control over Gotham's banks and various other aspects of the city, power and electricity and all of this other stuff. So with him being in control over Gotham City in that way, then he'll have the power to do whatever he wants to at that point. So it's at this point that we kind of get our first interaction physically between Batman, the Riddler, Detective Yin, and the Riddler's goons. And they're actually overwhelmed in this moment as the Riddler uses his staff that he wields and knocks out Detective Yin. And then Batman is sort of overwhelmed by the Riddler's goons at this point, a gang of maybe six goons or so. Overwhelm him and knocks Batman out also with the same gas. And they're both awakened, sort of strapped into this machine that the Riddler says he's going to use to play this game, to figure out, he's going to play 20 questions to figure out just who the Batman's identity is. And he's going to pretty much, it's a game to show just how brilliant he is.
Look who decided to join the party. Welcome to my lair, Batman, where questions are answers and yin is yang.
Cute Riddler, where are we?
Why, the same place you've been all night long, Yinzy. Inside my brain.
Stop speaking in riddles. Why are we here?
There is a living riddle walking amongst Gotham that everyone wants answered. Who is the Batman? You want to know, don't you, Yinzy? Too easy. Instead, we'll play a game.
Oh, you're gonna love playing shuffleboard in Arkham, Riddler.
Shh. The game is 20 questions. 20 yes or no's, from which my brilliant mind will deduce the true identity of the Batman.
And that's the thing that ultimately, of course, is always the undoing of the villains, it seems, especially the Riddler, that regardless of the universe, his hubris and his reliance and his arrogance and reliance on his own intelligence and being able to outsmart Batman is ultimately always his undoing, as we learn in this scene. And every question that Batman gets wrong is a shock of electricity sent through Detective Yin as he set it up. So Batman ultimately tricks the Riddler into standing in front of this electrical device that shoots the electrical waves into Detective Yin. They trick him into standing in front of it, and Batman lies at that moment. And the Riddler gets shocked. There's a brief scuffle at that point, but the Riddler manages to escape into these tunnels. So Detective Yin and Batman are not done just yet. Just when you think they've won, they chase after him further and split up at this point and realize Detective Yin stumbles upon this room where she discovers the Riddler's mainframe to be continuing its download. We see these green downloads of information going into the Riddler's mainframe, and Batman splits off. And that's kind of where we get the culmination of our third and final act here, is Detective Yin has to do her best to fight off the Riddler's goons that she discovers in this room where they're finishing the download. And Batman finally gets his hands on a very formidable foe in as far as hand-to-hand combat in the Riddler.
Yeah, that's probably our biggest action beat of the episode, and we'll certainly talk about that in visuals and a bit more in a moment. But yes, we have Yin sort of crawling through a ventilation shaft, making it into this mainframe room, and finding herself accosted with no weapons against several of the Riddler's henchmen and henchwomen, I guess. And she has to hold her own. Meanwhile, Batman is sort of being attacked as the Riddler. And I do really love this bit here where Riddler is still sort of obsessing over that he can solve this great riddle of who the Batman's identity is. And so he's still kind of barking questions at Batman, even though he's no longer tied up to the machine, and he's while sort of also physically attacking him. And finally, as Yin is able to take down most of the thugs, Batman is finally able to get the upper hand and knock the Riddler down. And just when the Riddler thinks he has one final trump card to play, by sticking his goons onto Batman, the doors open, and we see that Yin has in fact dealt with all of those thugs. And it leads us to kind of the finale of our episode here. Yin is in the back of a cruiser with a cup of coffee, talking with Chief Rojas. The Riddler sort of in one last fit of just being a poor sport, as the Riddler often is in these stories. In fact, does imply to Chief Rojas, who of course does not understand, because again, that's the entire B plot.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. That's really the only B plot of the episode, is that Chief Rojas can't understand riddles and is like constantly squeezing this stress ball because he's just so exasperated by all these super criminals. But yes, he doesn't quite understand it. But Yin does in fact sort of clue him in that the Riddler is suggesting that she is Batman's partner.
Pretty swift, Yin. Maybe one day you'll put that big brain of yours onto the whole "who is the Batman" thing.
Chief, you may be interested to know someone on your payroll works hand in hand with the Batman.
Oh yeah? Who?
Ask not who in your force works with the Bat. Ask why in.
Yin, answer it.
Why in, Chief? Why in? My name, Yin. Riddler says it's me.
Get this lunatic out of here! Huh? How would he know, that crazy psychopath? The Batman wasn't anywhere in sight tonight!
Nowhere in sight.
Of course, Chief Rojas says that's ridiculous and that the Riddler must be crazy, and they send him off to jail. And so Yin has a bit of a stay of execution here, as her, despite them having to sort of work more directly with each other in this episode, her and the Batman's secret partnership remains a secret, and the Riddler heads off to jail as we finish our episode for this week.
Yeah, the best part is when Rojas says that's ridiculous, and then you kind of get Batman peering over at the end, and Detective Yin saying, "Yes, that's reassuring. Yes, so ridiculous." Batman. But yeah, so I guess we can talk about what we liked and didn't like so much in this episode. I will say again, as we'll talk about probably at length in our next category, this is a very different take on the Riddler. He's much more of a formidable threat, physical threat to Batman, and he looks completely different than probably that we're used to. He's far more reliant on his hand-to-hand combat and the staff that he wields, but it's very much the same Riddler character that we're used to. As I mentioned, he relies on his intelligence, and that's ultimately his downfall, is that he believes he can outsmart not only Detective Yin but Batman and the rest of the Gotham City Police Department in order to obtain all of this information and control the city through the mainframe. I like that it's sort of a product of its time, because it's sort of this Deus Ex Machina story of, okay, he's going to control the city through the mainframe. Well, what's the mainframe? The mainframe's just it feels very much like an early 2000s phrase that was just used as okay, so we're going to control the mainframe, and that's how he's going to control everything, bank accounts and electrical grid and all of that. And it's, again, very, very much a product of its time, but I like that it doesn't feel completely out of the realm of something that would be brought into a modern story either. It feels like it could be something a Batman Beyond story if they had perhaps used that character in the Batman Beyond universe. So I do think that the story is perfectly fine in that way. I didn't see the same the old 60s Batman bringing that into it, that same plot style, but after you mentioned it, yeah, I can definitely see that's the same formula that was used then and just sort of updated for this. So it feels familiar, but I feel like it has its own take on it. With that said, it is very much all right, well, now they're in this scene and they have to solve this, and all right, they're in this scene, and it doesn't feel at any time, with the exception of that final riddle at the museum about the bear, what color the bear was, it doesn't really feel like the stakes are very high, or there's any actual threat of the bombs going off, because Batman is so smart and is able to figure these things out so very, very quickly. I will also say that it's sort of undercut Detective Yin a little bit. Although she ultimately, I feel like, is sort of responsible for the reason why they ended up getting out of the 20 questions trap when she threw that, tried to throw the Riddler off by telling him who Batman's identity actually was. But she sort of gets undercut as being reliant on Batman to help her solve every one of these, and that sort of makes her feel only slightly smarter than Rojas, who's the person that that couldn't figure any of these out, I guess.
Right. Yeah, I think, and they do it for right at the end of the van, the Minesweeper puzzle, as you said. There's a moment where Batman tries to give her the final input to type on the screen. She's like, I got it. And so I guess she figured out the pattern for that one. But maybe it would have been cool to see there's one of the puzzles or riddles where like Batman, there's interference or something where she can't hear Batman's voice, and she kind of has to figure it out herself. Or when she gets into that mainframe room at the end, like she has to stop the download, and there's one final riddle that she needs to do for the password or something, like something where she has to kind of figure something out for herself.
Right.
That would have probably been a little bit more satisfying as a narrative for Yin. Yeah, I definitely see where you're coming from there.
With that said, though, I think this is it's a perfectly fun 22 minutes. It felt very much like a great Saturday morning cartoon, and one that you could sit down with, as an adult or as a child and enjoy. There's lots of action. There's lots of intrigue and a little bit of intensity at the end there, and trying to figure out whether or not they're going to be able to stop the Riddler. And as I said, with the Riddler being a physical threat to Batman, there are times, and we didn't talk about it at the beginning of this episode because we've talked about it in prior episodes when we've covered the Batman, but this is very much an early on Batman year. I think it's year 2 we discovered, or his second year pretty much as Batman, or very early on in his career, maybe the third year. But it's very early on in his career. So he's still kind of figuring things out. He's still very much learning how to be Batman and is still coming into his own. So I like that the Riddler in this case was a formidable foe for him in hand-to-hand combat. And it felt very much like he didn't stand a chance at the end there. So for him to kind of eventually overcome him was a growth for the character throughout, as he finally figured out a way to best him and knock the staff out of his hand and ultimately kind of use it against him.
Yeah, absolutely. I think yeah, you still have those classic Riddler moments. You mentioned that of his need to be the smartest man and to prove himself to be the smartest man. It's not just that he's smart or that he believes he's smart. He needs everyone else to believe it too. And
Batman.
And of course
Batman.
Of course. In this case, when as you mentioned, when he's trying to solve and Yin starts saying that she's going to reveal the identity to him, he gets very, very upset. And as you mentioned, that sort of is his ultimate downfall, is that his need to be the smartest guy, especially as you said, smarter than Batman, is his undoing. So yeah, that's some pretty universal Riddler stuff there. Like I think for all the reasons we've talked about, I like this episode. It's fun. It's a really easy watch. We'll certainly talk more in visuals about how this version of Riddler is distinct as well. But overall, I settled on a 6 out of 10 for plot. I think it's good. I don't think it necessarily breaks a ton of new ground as far as a Riddler story or anything, but it is, it's a fun adventure, and it's as you said, it's a good way. It would be a good way to spend a Saturday morning in the year 2004.
Yeah, it's actually the same exact score that I gave it, and 6 out of 10 for all the reasons that we stated. All right, Liam, moving on to our visuals and animation. As you mentioned, no animation studio credited with this one. I feel like that was the case with a lot of these episodes, but we of course do know that this is dubbed the Matsudaverse, as we know, and a lot of the character designs we're done in the same vein. You can kind of hear our whole discussion about that in our very first episode that we covered of this back in the archives at DCAUreview.com. But all of these characters have their own very unique design, very much so in the vein of the Jackie Chan Adventures, because it was the same sort of character designers that worked on both shows. So if you're familiar with this style, it's very different than what you're used to in Batman the Animated Series. But I love that it has its very own identity. And we've talked about it before, I think, but even more so now, when you look and look back at the Batman the Animated Series, so much about that, as we've talked about probably ad nauseum here on this show, so much about that show is iconic. So when you're following up something that is so legendary and so well known, even at the time, even 7 or 8 years after it was on the air, which isn't a ton of time, but it had already had this like huge following and this huge love. It's such a difficult thing to kind of blaze your own trail at that point. And I feel like that one of the things that they did was to go out of their way to try and make things as different as possible. And visuals played a huge role in that. And I think looking at the Riddler, you can tell right away, this guy who looks like I don't know, Rob Zombie and Marilyn Manson had a baby or something like that. He's a very interesting styling of character. He's very tall and lanky. He's got this long brown hair. He's got this weird suit that sort of looks like maybe the last suit that we saw the Riddler wearing in the Batman the Animated Series, that sort of like morph suit, or that onesie, if you will, but it's got like the sleeves are cut out of it, and it's just sort of kind of appears on his, like there's question marks on his shoulders. He's kind of got what looks like either a mustache or paint coming out of the sides of his mouth, and he's wielding this golden scepter around with a question mark, which of course is a pretty classic Riddler thing, but also gives you flashbacks to the Jim Carrey Riddler. So it's very interesting. It takes on its own identity, and looking back at it, I don't think I liked it at the time, but I love now that they at least tried to do their own thing with this character. What about you?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's kind of, I think probably since Batman the Animated Series, there's kind of been two ways to go with Riddler. It's either a take on the original look or the Super Friends look, the onesie with the purple gloves and the question marks everywhere, or you do the suit with with some kind of, with the hat and everything. And so this version being a little bit more, as you said, still definitely in the vein of the any of those classic Silver Age Riddlers, but really just its own unique thing. And so many of the character designs, as we mentioned, if you look at the Joker, if you look at Bane and Penguin and some of those other characters in this series, they all had such unique looks. So coming in here with a really, really unique Riddler design, even when there's a couple of close-ups on him where he seems to have like really pronounced fangs in his teeth. Like you don't often in cartoons like this see like teeth actually drawn in. Usually it's just like the two white blocks in their mouth, but he specifically has those those fangs kind of drawn in there. Yeah, he has a very, Marilyn Manson's a really good shout. I think there's definitely some of that in his DNA here. But yeah, it is really interesting. And yeah, just being this sort of tall, very, very skinny looking character, it's really, really memorable. And yeah, I think it fits in. It's not necessarily what I would think of as a like classic Riddler design, obviously. But also I think that's why it works. It totally fits with that sort of really more out there, somewhat, anime or manga inspired designs that a lot of these characters took on in this series with, I believe Jeff Matsuda was sort of the lead character designer for this series. And it's really, really striking, and it totally fits into this sort of really sort of stylized world that he exists in.
Yeah, I agree that. So I think that's the big thing to talk about, especially for this episode. And I remember that being such a very stark contrast that was sort of shocking when we first saw the Riddler, and not one that I necessarily loved at the time, but I think I can appreciate it now and see what they were going for, just something completely different and unique in their own way. So we actually don't get an origin story or why he looks the way that he does in this episode, which is something, again, back to the plot, I think is unique. We didn't get a whole why is he the way that he is. They kind of leave that, I think, for later in the series. But so we don't quite know the origins of his costume or why he looks the way he does or what his background is. All we get is this information about him, and it makes him, as I said, a very formidable foe in some of these fight scenes against Batman, where Batman really gets his butt handed to him in the majority of the hand-to-hand combat that they do there. He's getting the tar beat out of him, and I think one of the things that I really appreciated this series, and I don't remember off the top of my head because it's been so long since I've watched the series as a whole, but I feel like maybe since it was kids WB, they were toning back down on some of the violence, and they were trying not to show as much violence on Saturday mornings, kind of getting back to the origins of some of those Batman the Animated Series episodes where they wouldn't show as much, versus the new Batman Adventures where they kind of allowed a little bit more violence to take place on screen. But one of the things that I feel like that they did to cover that up, they used those flashes where you see fists coming towards the screen and a bright flash and then the character falling back. But one of the ones that I enjoyed was something that you probably wouldn't see is Batman getting his face and head bashed in by this Riddler staff. And in that final scene where they're going hand to hand, they did this really neat trick where they show these silhouettes of them fighting and some flashing going on, and Batman, you can see Batman's clear silhouette and the Riddler silhouette as they're fighting, and the Riddler just smacking him around with his staff, and all you see is the silhouettes of it happening. So they kind of got away with being a little bit more violent than you would typically see, but I thought it was such a neat trick and a great visual that it worked so well. That was one of the things for me anyway that stood out, other than some of the puzzles and some of the ways, as I said, I think the bombs and the way that they were designed were very reminiscent or perhaps a source used for later on, and something you might see in the Arkham games, that day glow green color. And I think we've talked about it before also. I'm not a fan of like the baby poop green sky of Gotham. It's kind of distracting and makes it feel like there's some sort of gas attack happening at all times in Gotham. But again, it's a different take. They didn't go with the red skies, so they said, hey, we'll go with the green sky of Gotham, apparently.
I can't believe you're glossing over referring to something as baby poop green.
Yeah,
I can't believe you just expect me to continue on with this podcast after dropping that beautiful nugget in there. But yes, I think elsewhere that was kind of something we touched on briefly in plot. There isn't a lot of like punching and kicking, and as you said, the fights themselves have to kind of certainly there were certain rules I think they were trying to adhere to about what kind of violence they could and couldn't show. But I think the standout bit, that bit at the end with Batman, the Riddler fighting in the tunnels, there's a really, really cool shot I love where, in the middle of the battle as Riddler's sort of attacking Batman with different things, he grabs like a big electrical wire and pulls it out of the wall and then hits Batman with it, and you just see like the flashes of electricity, and then you see their silhouettes against the wall, their shadows. I think that's a really, really cool shot. And then the final bit there is he tries to swing the Riddler cane down on Batman, and Batman catches it and gives him a very solid quip that we will talk about in voice acting before laying that good punch in there. It's like, yeah, I think there's some fun stuff in there. I like the jetpack, the combination jetpack glider thing. It's a glider, but it also you can also has some sort of propulsion to it, so you can kind of zip around the skies of Gotham with it. I think that's kind of a fun way to get around and for Batman in this episode, because again he's kind of trying to stay out of the way. So I thought that was kind of clever and a good reason to bring that in. So yeah, overall, I don't think there's anything spectacular in the visuals. I said other than maybe that Riddler design, which I do really enjoy for this series. But overall, I still came to a pretty strong 7 out of 10 for my visual score.
Same right here. I think they do use some CGI in this also. I did notice it. It certainly was the more refined cell shading on top of the CGI. I think some of the computer reveals and stuff, descending from the ceiling, a couple of the parts of the Riddler's puzzles, I think, were also CGI. But I've pointed that out before in the past in Justice League Unlimited when they didn't do the cell shading over it and talked about how distracting it can be and how it really ages that. But I feel like for the most part, while you can kind of tell because the movements stand out, they're not as fluid, ironically, as the rest of the show. I think that they did a pretty good job of camouflaging it with the cell shading on top of it. So I did want to point that out, that was great. And I thought, honestly, the machine that they had Batman and Detective Yin, that actually was something that reminded me of the 60s Batman or Batman 66, where you have this machine that the Riddler's hooked two people up to, and one of them's going to get shocked if it's also a lie detector at the same time that can tell if Batman's telling a lie or not. So I thought just how gimmicky that was, but the way that the room looked and the way that it was set up, I thought was a pretty neat visual, and ultimately that, along with just the way that Batman moves. I think we talked about it in the first couple of episodes of this show that we've covered, but the hashtag cape movement, I got to bring it back here, but there's a lot of great cape movement for the way that this character was designed and the way that his cape splays out, and you get that in a lot of the action sequences, and certainly, as you mentioned, as he's flying around on that Bat jetpack. And the only other thing that I'll mention is that there was a pretty neat use of a gadget that he uses that ultimately helps them solve the van puzzle, where at the very last second, as the van is speeding away, he throws this batarang that looks like it's a magnet that also has a camera in it. And that reminded me of something that you would see in the 50s era of Batman comics, where it's a magnetic bat camera batarang that allows him to follow behind the van and sort of continue to help Detective Yin in solving the puzzle that she's working on. So I thought that was neat, in that it was a throwback sort of to that weird sci-fi era. I think there's even a Batman cover where there's like a bunch of Batman batarangs on it from the Detective Comics run in that 50s Sprang era, where you see a bunch of batarangs. It just reminded me of that, but it was modernized to fit into this Batman universe, so I appreciated that. But yeah, not bad scores from either of us there, with pretty strong 7 out of 10. All right, Liam, let's move on to our music category for this week. So as we have mentioned in the past before, the theme for this first season, and subsequently the sort of interludes that are played throughout most of the episode, are directly responsible for the band U2's guitarist Edge, or The Edge, if you will. And that's pretty much what we get for the majority of the show, is you get these little sort of guitar riff interludes that both act as scene changes and also sort of punctuate different conversations that people are having. But it's not really the main focus, I feel like, for this show.
Yeah, in this case, I didn't really pick up on like a specific refrain for the Riddler in any way. So you kind of have, you have the action riffs, and you have the sort of the choir moment, or as you said, sort of the scene changes, or I think there's some cool moments with that. I think certainly the theme itself, as you mentioned, is pretty great, but then you do have the moment where as Yin is sort of confronting the Riddler at the mainframe at City Hall, and he sort of reveals that he's been aware that the Batman's been helping her this whole time, and Batman sort of is walking out of this smoke that's behind her, and you just sort of see his silhouette forming, and then he walks out. You kind of get that riff there is kind of a cool moment. That's a little goosebump inducing for me, but yeah, it is very reliant as far as the action beats go. You have, I think, like really fast paced, like almost like drum machine kind of driving the pace of the scene, and then again that sort of the light some guitar and maybe a little synthesizer brought in over that. But it is sort of I don't know if the word repetitive is the word I'm looking for, but it's very similar, and it seems to sort of punctuate the whole show in very similar scenes. So it doesn't seem like we have the same sort of style of music, certainly, as we're used to with our main DCAU shows. That being said, I don't have anything particularly bad to say about the music, so I ended up giving it a 5 out of 10.
Yep, I gave it a 6 out of 10 just because I love the Edge's guitar riff, and I love the intro, season 1 intro of the Batman for life for me. The rest of the seasons can suck it. But yes, no, I'm just kidding. They're fine. They're fine compositions. I'm just a fan of that season 1 guitar riff. So just a slightly higher score for me on that one. But that will take us to our final category of the day, Liam, which is going to be voice acting. And luckily for us, it is not a huge cast because we don't have a ton of voices, not a ton of characters in this week's episode, but worth revisiting some of these characters that we may have mentioned before in past reviews, since it's been over 100 episodes since we've really talked about this show. Let's talk about this week's voice cast.
Yeah, very, very small cast. We do have Jesse Cordy as Chief Rojas. Folks would probably know him best as LeFou in Disney's Beauty and the Beast. A really fun little pull there. Lots of other voice acting credits to his name as well, but that was the first one that jumped out as me as Gaston's sort of oafish sidekick in Beauty and the Beast. A classic there. But again, he is sort of all of the comic relief of the episode while Batman and Yin are sort of solving all these riddles, and it's this frantic sort of race against time, and he's just squeezing on this stress ball and yelling about how he hates riddles and all this stuff. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, I feel like he hammed it up a little bit too much, and maybe it's his history, as you said he's got a lot of voice acting credits to his name, but it did feel like more of an over the top Disney type of performance than you're used to for one of these cartoons that we typically do. So it was a little bit distracting at times. I did really honestly appreciate the whole trying to believe that this man doesn't understand what the line, and it's not his fault, but it's just the way that the line was written and then his delivery of it. But how do you get everything is ancient inside of me and you get to a museum? It was like, come on, man. Like you're a grown adult, man. Like let's put two and two together here. Like you're also, and I get it, like the whole thing is he's the chief and he's a big idiot, but come on. Like, all right. So I didn't love his performance. I do love that last little bit, honestly, with him and the Riddler, though, because I guess it kind of ties to that. Like, he's such an idiot that he doesn't believe that his own detective could be working alongside Batman. Like, that's how idiotic this guy is. So I guess in the end, it did work out. It was a fine performance, but there were at times where I was just like, all right, come on now. Let's give this guy less to do.
Yeah, I think that's fair enough. Elsewhere in our cast, we have the villain of our piece here, a very famous name, I would think, to a lot of people listening here. Robert Englund, most famously known as the original, and I would say, unquestionably, I would assume still the favorite portrayal of one Frederick Krueger in the Nightmare on Elm Street series. Just an all-time horror movie legend here. And he does have it's funny because if you've ever listened to him speak in those movies, even if you've only seen a clip, he has this big sort of over-the-top booming voice, and he has this really, it's really kind of stereotypically like angry horror movie. He's a talker. He's not a silent killer. And it's really interesting because if I had not read the credits, it does not to me sound like Freddy Krueger, this Riddler character. Like he's got a very sinister edge to him, and there's like a slight accent to him. And I think Mr. Englund, I'm not sure if he is from the US or not. But there's like a slight accent to it, but he has this real like sort of sinister, kind of a little higher, raspier voice to his portrayal. And but I think he nails, again, what we've talked about, this sort of eternal tones of a Riddler, which is just this guy who just constantly needs to sort of reinforce for himself that he is smarter than you.
Almost done. Just a few more gigabytes, Riddler, sir. Then drain the brain.
Freeze, Riddler. Knowledge is power, huh?
A fitting heist for a brainiac, don't you think, Yinzi? If I need money, boom, instant access to Gotham's bank account numbers. If I want to shut down Gotham's transportation grid, boom, instant access to the technical specs. Information! It's all here in the city's mainframe, soon to be uploaded into mine! But aren't you the smart detective to see the riddles within my riddles?
We can trade IQ scores when you're behind bars, Riddler.
Would that be your IQ or the Batman's?
I don't know what you're talking.
Please! Do you think I went to all the trouble to distract Gotham PD from my real crime? It was the Batman who concerned me. Isn't that right, Batman? The game ends now, Riddler.
Yeah, it's a great performance. I will give it that. And I'm not a horror movie fan, and I haven't seen, but maybe if he portrayed, I think I've seen part of Freddy versus Jason. So if he was
Yes.
playing Freddy in Freddy versus Jason, then I've probably
yes.
Okay. All right. So then I have seen him in that. And even not having seen those movies, you can't miss the cultural impact that those movies have had and miss out on scenes or even clips or clips of his portrayal of that character. But yeah, it's interesting because we talked about it a lot in various different performances in the other episodes and other shows that we've reviewed, where you take a character who is so well known for one particular role and you put them in a different role. A lot of times that can be distracting. A lot of times that can be, that can, even if they're a great on-screen actor, that doesn't always translate to them being a voice actor. So the fact that he was not only terrific in this role, but was almost unrecognizable as his role known on as Freddy Krueger, I think is doubly great because it proves that he has the ability to be dynamic in his performances, that he's able to emote different characters and come up with this character's own way to speak and communicate and his own sort of motive for the way that he acts. So I think it's a great performance for this week, and hats off to him because the greats that we talk about for the DCAU are people sometimes that, especially in the case of Mark Hamill, obviously, who are well known for other roles, but when they step into this world, it's completely forgettable. Those roles don't even come into your mind when you honestly think about it. If you don't think about it.
Absolutely, yeah. I think that's a great way of phrasing it there. But elsewhere in our pretty small voice cast, we have our secondary lead character here. We have, of course, Ellen Yin, played by Ming-Na Wen, who, speaking of Disney, of course, was the voice of the animated Mulan, but probably more modernly would be known as Fennec Shand on the Book of Boba Fett and Mandalorian shows.
There you go. I knew I recognized that voice from someplace. She's great. I think that, and this is another case of an actress who I think. Sometimes I think I'm a fan of the Mandalorian and the Book of Boba Fett series and that whole, and I think that her performance in that show sometimes can come off a little wooden at times, but I think some of it is because she's meant to be sort of an emotionalist person. So with that said, I think that her role as Detective Yin in this is great. She comes off, despite her character maybe not acting like it, she comes off very intelligently. I think she comes off as a great ally for Batman, and I like the fact that they pair her well, and she pairs well with our Batman voice here that we'll discuss in a second. That ultimately I feel like they have some good chemistry, and it's a very believable relationship. But I love that they went with a strong female lead for this an original character, and they chose somebody with some pretty good voice acting chops to do the role.
Absolutely, yeah. I think she's really good. She has this sort of stern, no nonsense thing about her, but she also is very clearly passionate about about justice, and she her interactions with Robert Englund, I think, as he's sort of taunting her from behind a screen, and she's sort of declaring that she's gonna track him down and take him down. I think she's a good heroic foil for the Riddler here. And then I think her, and of course our Batman of the piece, this being Rino Romano, who a voice again you may recognize from doing various voiceover work for the major television networks in the US, or you may know him perhaps if you're a fan of short-lived bad cartoons, Spider-Man Unlimited. Of course, he was the voice of Spider-Man on that show. No, I kind of have a soft spot for that show, even though it's not particularly good. But
I haven't watched it in I don't know, 18 years, but I feel like there's no way it can be anywhere near as good as I think that it might have been. So I'll just never watch it just in case it is really, really bad. So
I think that's probably the best strategy there. But yeah, I think he gets probably a lot less to do, because again, this is really more of a Yin and Riddler, Ming-Na Wen and Robert Englund really kind of control this episode from a voice acting standpoint. But he's just kind of there in the background, and I think maybe the best stuff with him is that final scene where he gets to, as we mentioned, he gets to throw in his quip as he catches the Riddler's cane and asks him what's black and blue and green all over. It's a very cheesy, again, a very sort of cheesy line, but it's delivered again with complete sort of sincerity. There's no winking at the camera, so to speak, with that. So I think that's the way to do it. If Batman's doing a quip, you got to kind of give it the full, like the sneering Clint Eastwood sort of grit to it, even if it's a kind of a silly line. And I think Mr. Romano does that here.
Yeah, I think he's fine. I think we've talked about that we have talked about it in prior DCAU episodes, that sometimes when the main character takes a back seat, that allows them to sort of show and their chops in a different way. And I think that scene ultimately where he and Detective Yin work together and sort of outsmart and begin frustrating the Riddler and really show this chemistry that they've developed and how they can work well together, and then splitting up and ultimately reuniting at the end there to his delight to see the Detective Yin has sort of already taken care of the Riddler's goons. I love their chemistry. I think that his Batman not having as much dialogue in this, other than sort of walking through some of the puzzles, is a perfect showcase for him. And it's not too much, it's not too little, and I think it really allowed those times where he did speak and the times that he did have dialogue to sort of stand out a little bit more. So I had no issue with his performance this week.
Yeah, so and that is kind of the end of our voice cast there. So yeah, all things considered, like I said, I think the strength of Ming-Na Wen as Yin and Robert Englund as Riddler gave me I think, like I said, I think it's a pretty strong episode, even if the material isn't necessarily the strongest. I think the actors involved here kind of elevated the material to an extent, and I settled on a pretty strong 8 out of 10 for my voice score.
Nice. I went just a couple points lower because while I thought everybody was great, I didn't think there was anything that necessarily blew me out of the water, so to speak. So I went with a 6 out of 10 for my score, but I don't think there's anything wrong with giving higher marks simply just for some of the reasons that we talked about. So good answer, as they say on Family. All right, Liam. Well, that will bring us to our final scores for today. Tallying everything up, I end up with a 25 out of 40. What about you?
Yeah, I am just a couple points higher. In fact, I think just 1 point higher. I have a 26 out of 40 as my final score.
There you go. All right. Well, I guess, Liam, that brings us, it's always hard with our Elseworlds tales here and trips around the multiverse when we talk about rewatchability, because this has no bearing on our overall watch of the DCAU. And this show in and of itself is self-contained. There's nothing that happens after the Batman. There's no Justice League or continuation of the Matsudaverse, so to speak. So I guess self-contained, looking at it, if you're going to do a complete watch through or a watch of the important episodes, I guess a debut of a villain is pretty important if you're going to watch some of them, especially one of Batman's the top 3 or 4 rogues, I'd say, when it comes to the Riddler. So I'd say it's a 1 thumb up. It's probably, if you're doing a watch through of this show specifically, I think it's a must. I think if you're looking at all of the episodes and which are the best episodes to watch, maybe not. But it's a pretty pivotal one based on who the villain is.
Yeah, I'd agree with that completely. It's the introduction of, as you said, the classic Batman rogue, and then Also, as certain plot points, like we talked about with Batman sort of secretly working with Detective Yin, is sort of a thread that continues all throughout this second season of the show before they kind of changed things up in the later seasons here. But I would say that's worth a rewatch or a watch for just for that. And the Riddler does return a couple of times more in this series, and so I think you got to watch the debut of one of those iconic Gotham villains. And and even though as this is kind of an example, I don't know if we've had too many of these as of late, but where we'll talk about the scores don't always necessarily reflect how much we enjoyed an episode, because this was a breeze to get through as far as an episode to watch and review. But even though if it's not an all-time great among the things we reviewed, it's a fun way to spend 21 minutes and you get the very unique take of the Riddler look and everything in this series. So that's an easy one thumb up, I think.
There we have it. All right, Liam. Well, that will begin to wrap us up for this week. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Don't forget to give us the old subscribe on your favorite podcast app. And if it allows you, leave a review. A 5-star one would be much appreciated if you so choose to do so. A little blurb about what you like to, if your podcast app allows you to do that, would be great. Don't forget, you can also, as mentioned before, you can get all of your DCAU content on the Pod Tower on YouTube, youtube.com/the Pod Tower, along with our other friends at Tim Talk and the Watchtower Database. Also, if you want to support the podcast, a couple ways to do that. Besides subscribing to us on the YouTube channel is a big help to us. You can also, if you want to support us monetarily, why? I don't know. But hey, we'd be happy to take it. Thank you so much. There's a link at the bottom of all of our Anchor podcast episodes you can click on if you want to do that, if you want to support us that way, or head over to DCAUreview.com and you can check out our store, get yourself a piece of merch if you wish. Don't forget, you can follow us also on our social media at DCAU Review, both on Twitter and Instagram. Liam, we are finally here. It is a huge week coming up for us here at the DCAU Review. We are on the precipice of number 200. Our 200th episode. I thought we would never get here. I don't think we ever had ideas that we would reach 200 episodes, not even counting our bonus episodes, but it's 200 in our standard episodes here. So it's a big week coming up here. Next week, we've actually already spoiled this if you checked out our appearance on Nathan's Superman the Animated podcast. You heard us talk a little bit about that. So some of you, if you check that appearance out, you already know. But Liam, we have an exciting return to where we all started here way back on episode 1 with returning to the world of, well, it's all the same world, but the original series we're covering. We're going back to covering Batman, the animated series for episode number 200.
That's right. And we have I think an appropriately a large and big important episode to talk about. In fact, it's 2 episodes, and that is the full debut of Ra's al Ghul and all that implies in The Demon's Quest parts 1 and 2, an absolute classic, if for no other reason than because of how much footage from it is used in the Adventures of Batman and Robin title sequence. Which we will certainly get into a little bit of that, of the changeover with the show from Batman the Animated Series to the Adventures of Batman and Robin, and some of that as we get into the latter half of these original 65 episodes here. So lots of BTAS, and then of course the new Batman Adventures to talk about still to come on our show in the next the months and years to come here. But a really big important 2 episodes to talk about, and what better place than on your favorite podcast app or the Pod Tower YouTube channel for our 200th episode.
That is right. And we have some exciting things to announce about the rest of the month on that episode as well. So you are not going to want to miss it. Excited to talk about that with you. But until then, I'm Cal.
And I'm Liam.
And we'll talk to you on the 200th episode of the DCAU Review.
Bye-bye.